I knew something was wrong the second I stepped off the plane in Beacon Harbor. My name is Colton Royce. I'm 37 years old, and I'd just flown back from New York to claim what my grandfather left me. Elliot Moon, my grandfather's driver for 20 years, was supposed to be waiting. He never missed a pickup. But instead of Elliot's familiar smile, I saw a black Audi with tinted windows idling by the curb. The driver stepped forward, stone-faced in an expensive suit. "Your parents sent me," he said in a flat tone. I hadn't told them I was coming. My pulse quickened, but I forced a smile. Of course. How thoughtful. The ride was silent, tension coiling in my gut like a loaded spring. Beacon Harbor's skyline blurred past, neon reflecting off rain-slicked streets. I gripped my phone, half tempted to call my lawyer, but something told me to wait. When we pulled up to the family's three-story villa, I expected warmth. Instead, it felt like walking into an ambush. My father Gideon sat at the dining table, shuffling papers like this was any other evening. My mother Maricel stood by the window, swirling a glass of wine. Neither looked surprised to see me. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. "We need to talk," I said, skipping pleasantries. Maricel exhaled, setting down her pen. "We figured you'd show up sooner or later." I glanced around the familiar room. "Where's Grandpa's factory? Why is it shut down?" Gideon sipped his drink slowly. "Because it's no longer ours." The words hit like a gut punch. I stared at them, waiting for the joke, the explanation. Nothing came. "You sold it." My voice was sharper than intended. Maricel barely blinked. "Yes. Months ago. You were busy in New York, so we handled it." Handled it. Like they'd thrown away old shoes. I took a slow breath, trying to stay calm. "It wasn't yours to sell." "Technically, it was," Gideon said smoothly. "You inherited it, but we managed the business. It was failing. We did what was best." I forced a laugh. "Best for who?" No answer. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my grandfather's will. The original copy, notarized and sealed. I'd read it dozens of times. My name was on every asset. There was no clause allowing them to act on my behalf. I tossed the paper onto the table. "This says otherwise." Maricel barely glanced at the will. "You should speak to our lawyer." There it was. The deflection. The corporate maneuvering. I leaned in, voice low. "Fine. I'll talk to your lawyer. But I hope you realize something. If what you did was illegal, you're both going to lose a hell of a lot more than the factory." Gideon's expression darkened, but he said nothing. I turned on my heel, grabbed my coat, and walked out. The black Audi was still waiting, but I wasn't getting in. I had my own plans. I didn't go to their lawyer. That would have been playing their game, and I had no intention of walking into a rigged fight. Instead, I went to see Elliot Moon. He was more than just my grandfather's driver. He was the closest thing to a confidant my grandfather ever had. If anyone knew what really happened to the factory, it was him. His apartment was in an older part of Beacon Harbor, tucked away in a quiet alley lined with lanterns. When he opened the door, his eyes widened. "I knew you'd come," he said, stepping aside. "But I thought it would be sooner." That hit me like a slap. "You knew?" Elliot sighed, gesturing for me to sit. His place was small but spotless. Framed photos of my grandfather lined the walls. "I knew something was wrong the day they announced the sale. Your parents fired half the staff before the papers were even signed. No severance. No explanation." I clenched my jaw. They made it seem like the business was failing. He continued, "That's what they told the workers." But that wasn't true. My chest tightened. "How do you know?" Elliot gave me a long look before standing up and crossing the room. He opened a cabinet, pulled out an old metal lockbox, and set it on the table between us. The key was already in the lock. He turned it. Inside was a stack of documents. "I saved what I could," he said, handing me a folder. "Financial records. Orders." The factory was turning a profit, even in its final months. I flipped through the pages, my stomach sinking with every number. The factory hadn't been dying. It had been thriving. "They wanted to sell it before you could take control," Elliot said quietly. I gritted my teeth. My parents hadn't just sold my inheritance. They'd lied to my face about why. "Who bought it?" I asked. Elliot hesitated. "That's where things get complicated." I glanced up. "What do you mean?" He handed me another paper. This one was different. A contract, not for the sale, but for a partnership. I scanned the names, and then I saw it. My father hadn't just sold the business. He'd sold it to someone he knew. A name I recognized instantly. A name that made my blood run cold. Cashin Voss. I stood up, gripping the paper. I need to see this bastard myself. I didn't sleep that night. My mind spun, piecing together the betrayal like a shattered mirror. My parents hadn't just stolen from me. They'd used my grandfather's life's work to cut me out completely. Cashin Voss was a businessman on paper, a shark in reality. He didn't buy companies. He swallowed them, then gutted them for parts. He didn't just want my grandfather's factory. He wanted the legacy, and my father had given it to him. By morning, I was on a plane to Seattle. Cashin's office was in a sleek high-rise overlooking the harbor. The kind of place where power wasn't flaunted, it was assumed. The receptionist barely glanced at me. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," I said. "But tell him it's about the Beacon Harbor factory he just acquired." That got her attention. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "He's not available." I smirked. "I'll wait." She opened her mouth to argue, but then something behind me shifted. The air changed. Footsteps, controlled and deliberate. I turned. Cashin Voss himself stood in the doorway, watching me like I was a curiosity. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, in a dark suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. "You have 5 minutes," he said. I followed him into his office. Floor-to-ceiling windows screamed control. He gestured to a seat, but I didn't take it. "I'm here about the sale of my grandfather's factory," I said. He sat down, adjusting his cufflinks. "Your parents' factory," he corrected. I dropped the will onto his desk. "Mine." He glanced at it, then at me, unimpressed. "You came all this way to show me a piece of paper?" "I came to tell you that the sale was fraudulent," I said. "My parents had no legal right to sell it, which means you don't own it." Silence. Then he laughed. A slow, deliberate chuckle like I'd just told him the funniest joke in the world. "You think a will is going to stop me?" he said. I didn't blink. "I think a lawsuit will." He smirked. "Lawsuits take time. Money. Influence. I have all three." "Do you?" I clenched my jaw. Then he tilted his head, watching me with amusement. "Your father didn't tell you, did he?" The hairs on my neck stood up. "Tell me what?" Cashin leaned back, enjoying this. "He didn't just sell the factory to settle business. He offered it to me before there was even trouble." My stomach dropped. I shook my head. "That doesn't make sense. The factory was profitable. Why would he?" Then I saw it. The truth hit me like a freight train. My father hadn't sold the factory because he had to. He'd sold it because he wanted to. Because he never wanted me to have it in the first place. Cashin saw the realization dawn on my face and smiled. "This was never about money," he said. "It was about keeping you out." I stood there, fists clenched, pulse roaring in my ears. Cashin folded his hands. "So tell me, now that you know the truth, what are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I was going to find one. I walked out of Cashin's office feeling like the ground had been ripped from under me. My father hadn't been forced into this deal. He'd orchestrated it. Deliberately. Methodically. He'd chosen to strip me of my inheritance, to erase my grandfather's legacy, to make sure I was left with nothing. Back in New York, I sat in my tiny apartment and stared at my phone. A message was waiting from my Aunt Aggie. I almost didn't open it. I almost deleted it and moved on. But something made me tap it. It was a video file. Grainy, low quality. The sound hit me first. Glasses clinking, silverware scraping, laughter. The loud, easy kind that comes when people are too comfortable. The camera was propped against something, catching glimpses of familiar faces in dim chandelier light. My stomach twisted before I even knew why. Then I heard my father's voice. "I mean, how long is he going to keep up this little fantasy? New York? A business? Come on." The kid's barely keeping himself afloat. It's embarrassing. Laughter. Full-bodied and mean. "Betty's living in some rat-infested shoebox, calling it the grind." My cousin Ridge chimed in. Ridge, whose car payments I'd secretly covered for months. More laughter. Then the voice that made my hands go numb. "My mother. Colton tries so hard. Bless his heart." For a second, I hoped she'd defend me. But then she sighed. "But let's be honest, he was never the smart one. He doesn't have what it takes for real success. Some people just don't." The laughter that followed was louder. Someone clapped the table. A toast was made to my failure. I stood there, phone burning in my hand. They never knew. They never knew how many nights I'd gone hungry, so they wouldn't. They never knew how many deals I'd chased, how many rejections I'd swallowed, just to keep their bills paid. But now they were about to find out exactly how far a failure could fall. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called a small law office in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with a simple sign. 3 hours later, I walked out with everything I needed. A new identity, new banking, a paper trail that led nowhere. Ryan Colton was dead. The man walking down the street was someone else entirely. I didn't contact my family. I let the silence do the talking. No money transfers. No calls. Nothing. The first call came from Maricel within 3 days. I didn't pick up. Then Gideon. Then Ridge. Voicemail stacked up like dominoes, but I let them sit. By the end of the week, the polite concern had turned ugly. The texts weren't confused anymore. They were angry. Colton, I don't know what's going on, but my rent was due yesterday. Call me. Maricel, the payment didn't come through. This isn't funny. Gideon, dude, WTF? My card declined. Ridge. Then finally, one that stopped me cold. From Aunt Aggie. Colton, I need to talk to you. I think I did something bad. I let her message sit for 3 hours. Let her stew in it. When I finally called back, I could hear panic in her voice. Colton, oh thank God. Listen, I think I sent you something by accident. I almost laughed. You mean the video? She sucked in a sharp breath. So you saw it? Oh yeah, I said. I saw everything. Silence. Then a sniffle. You know how they get after a few drinks. They don't mean it. They meant every word. I said. But you already know that. In a lower voice, Aggie asked. You didn't tell your mother, did you? I paused. Tell her what? A long silence. That you were the one paying for everything. The room tilted. My head buzzed with static. She didn't know. None of them did. Who do they think has been sending the money? I asked, voice eerily calm. She hesitated. They think it's your father's life insurance. They think he left some secret fund for your mother, and she's been sharing it. My father, dead for 10 years. They thought he'd taken care of them from the grave. Not a single one had questioned it. Not a single one had thought maybe it was me. I let out a slow breath. Aggie, I need you to do something for me. What? I smiled coldly. Tell them I'm dead. The silence stretched long enough to choke. What the hell did you just say? Aggie whispered. You heard me. I said. They already think the money was coming from Dad, right? So let's see what happens when it stops. Permanently. Colton, that's insane. Is it? They sat at that table and called me pathetic while spending my money. Let's see who really gave a damn. The fallout was instant. Within 24 hours, my phone was flooded with texts and missed calls. Messages piled up like wreckage from a train crash. Please tell me this isn't true. I need to hear your voice. Maricel, what the hell is going on? If this is a joke, it's not funny. Gideon. But exactly 3 days after the payment stopped, the real panic set in. Maricel's rent bounced. The electricity at Uncle Mac's got shut off. Ridge's credit card declined. Their reactions weren't grief. They weren't mourning me. They were terrified. Not because they'd lost a son, nephew, or cousin, but because they'd lost their lifeline. A week later, I sent Aggie another message. So who cried the hardest? She responded almost immediately. Colton, I don't think you understand what you've done. Oh, I understand just fine. Answer the question. Another pause. Your mother. But not for the reason you want. I frowned. What does that mean? A minute passed. Then, she thinks you had life insurance. She's been making calls to banks, to insurance companies. She's not grieving. She's looking for a payout. I felt something deep inside me snap. They didn't just see me as a failure. They saw me as a paycheck. I let them squirm for 2 more days. 2 days of Maricel frantically calling every insurance provider. 2 days of Gideon cursing my name, texting Aggie about beneficiary claims. 2 days of Ridge losing his mind when his debt started swallowing him. They didn't care about me. They cared about the money. On the 3rd morning, I walked back into that small law office in Brooklyn. The receptionist barely looked up. Appointment. I slid a paper across the counter. A single sentence. I need to legally disappear. Her head snapped up. You're serious? 3 hours later, I had everything. A new name. Clean banking. All legal, all airtight. Meanwhile, back in Beacon Harbor, I started making anonymous calls. One tipped to Ridge's creditors about his hidden assets. Another concerned citizen messaged his landlord about lease violations. Within 48 hours, Ridge's car was repossessed and his apartment had an eviction notice. He went from posting club nights on social media to begging for loans in private messages. Next was Uncle Mac. The man loved two things: running his mouth and avoiding taxes. One phone call to the IRS got them very interested in his cash business. But Maricel required something more personal. She'd built a life off my sacrifice. When she thought I was dead, she hadn't mourned. She'd gone hunting for payouts. So I made her famous. I sent the video to everyone. Her friends, church group, neighbors, even her boss. And to make sure it hit harder, I added a message. This is what she said about the son who kept her from being homeless. Hope she's proud. Within 24 hours, the fallout began. People she'd known for years stopped answering calls. Whispers started. Shame spread like wildfire. But the best part? Her job. She worked for a family values company, and when that video got around, they didn't just fire her for the cruel words. They fired her because she'd been accepting unreported money for years. It was glorious, but I wasn't finished yet. While my family burned, I was building. I'd been in contact with my lawyer Simon Hale back in New York. He'd found something in my grandfather's papers that changed everything. A second contract. One that overrode any sale made without my explicit consent. My grandfather had anticipated this betrayal. He'd made sure there was a way to undo it. I finally had something real. Something that could rip this whole deal apart. I flew back to Seattle and walked into Cashin's office again. This time, he didn't make me wait. "You're back," he said, not looking surprised. I dropped the contract on his desk. "This wipes out my father's deal. Legally, the factory is still mine." Cashin studied the document, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "You're asking me to walk away from a deal worth millions." "No," I said, leaning forward. "I'm asking you to back the right deal." He raised an eyebrow. "I don't just want to take it back. I want a partner. My grandfather built something great, but I know it needs to evolve. And you're the kind of man who knows how to make that happen." I could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of risks and rewards. Cashin didn't care about family drama. He cared about opportunity. Finally, he smiled. "You're smarter than your father." I smirked. That's not exactly a high bar. Cashin chuckled, then leaned back. "All right, let's say I'm interested. What happened to your father?" I met his gaze. "That's up to you." He studied me, then slowly nodded. "I like you. You know how to play the game." He extended his hand. I shook it. By the time I left Seattle, everything had changed. I had Cashin's backing, legal ownership of the factory, and my family had no idea what was coming. I didn't give them a warning. I wanted them to feel it. When I walked back into their house the next morning, Gideon was already on the phone, pacing frantically. Maricel sat stiffly on the couch, staring at the contract I'd left the night before. They knew. I took my time pouring tea, savoring the silence before dropping the bomb. "I spoke to Cashin," I said. Gideon stopped pacing. Maricel finally looked up. "He's not happy," I continued. "Turns out people don't like being dragged into illegal deals." Gideon's face was pale. "What did you do?" I smiled. "What you should have done. I made an offer he couldn't refuse." He shook his head, almost laughing. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." "No," I shot back. "You don't. Cashin and I have a deal now. He's backing me. The factory is mine again." Silence. Then Gideon's voice dropped. "You don't understand how business works." "Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand that you sold out your own father's legacy because you were afraid of being overshadowed." His jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. I turned to Maricel. "And you let him." "You both did." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't look away. I exhaled, letting the weight settle. "It's over. You lost." Gideon scoffed, trying to regain control. "You think Cashin is your friend? He'll chew you up and spit you out." I smirked. "Maybe, but at least I'm sitting at the table." He had nothing left to say. I finished my tea, set the cup down, and turned to leave. "Oh, and one more thing," I added. "Cashin's sending someone over later. You might want to be home for that." Gideon's face went slack. Maricel inhaled sharply. I didn't wait to see the fallout. I had a factory to run. But first, I had one more family matter to settle. My brother Thatcher had been suspiciously quiet through all this. Too quiet. I found him at his usual spot, a trendy bar in Charleston where he liked to play big shot with Daddy's money. When he saw me walk in, his face went white. "Hello, Thatcher," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. He stammered, trying to recover. "Colton? I thought you were dead?" "Yeah, that was the idea. But here I am." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "I know about the side deal." Thatcher's eyes darted around the bar. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone, showing him a series of text messages. His messages. To Cashin's people, trying to cut his own deal behind everyone's back. You tried to sell me out to save yourself? I said. Your own brother. He swallowed hard. Look, I was just trying to. Save your own skin. I know. I put my phone away. The question is, what am I going to do about it? Thatcher was sweating now. Colton, please. I made a mistake. Yes, you did. You picked the wrong side. I stood up, dropping a 20 on the table. Enjoy your last drink on the family name. Tomorrow, you won't have one. The next morning, I held a press conference at the factory. Local media, workers, everyone who mattered in Beacon Harbor. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. 6 months ago, this factory was sold illegally by people who had no right to make that decision. Today, I'm announcing that sales have been voided. The Royce family factory is back under Royce family control. Cheers from the workers. The camera flashes. But this isn't just about reclaiming what was stolen. It's about building something better. Under new management, we're expanding operations, increasing wages, and creating jobs. More cheers. I raised my hand for quiet. I also want to address some recent rumors about my family. Yes, there was a dispute. Yes, some people tried to steal what wasn't theirs. But I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in the results. That was a lie, but it sounded good for the cameras. The people responsible for the illegal sale will face consequences through proper legal channels. Justice will be served. After the press conference, I met with Detective Lena Ortiz. She'd been investigating some of the financial irregularities surrounding the sale. Now she had everything she needed. This should be enough for fraud charges, she said, reviewing the documents. Your parents are looking at serious jail time. I nodded. What about the others? Ridge, Uncle Mac. Tax evasion, fraud, conspiracy. Your cousin's creditor issues are civil, but the fake insurance claims cross into criminal territory. Within a week, the arrests began. Gideon first, led away in handcuffs as reporters shouted questions. Then Maricel, trying to hide her face as she was booked. Ridge and Mac followed. Uncle Mac actually tried to run, which made for great television. Thatcher was the last. I made sure to be there when they arrested him at that same Charleston bar. The irony was too perfect to miss. With my family in legal trouble and Cashin fully backing my expansion plans, I threw myself into rebuilding the factory. We hired back every worker who'd been fired. We upgraded equipment, streamlined processes, and within 3 months, we were more profitable than ever. But success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. That's when Elliot knocked on my office door. You look tired, son, he said. I glanced up from the financial reports. Just busy. Good busy. He sat down across from my desk. Your grandfather used to say that winning wasn't worth much if you lost yourself doing it. I leaned back in my chair. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time to decide what kind of man you want to be. Your grandfather's grandson, or something else entirely. That night, I stood at the harbor pier, looking out at the water. The factory lights reflected off the waves, and I could hear the night shift working inside. Good, honest work. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Saw the news. Proud of what you built from what they tried to destroy. It was signed with just an initial, A. Aggie, the aunt who'd accidentally started this whole thing with a misdirected video. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, thank you. She responded quickly. Your grandfather would be proud too. That hit harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on revenge that I'd almost forgotten what I was supposed to be honoring. The next morning, I made another announcement. The factory would be renamed the Beacon Harbor Manufacturing Cooperative. Workers would receive profit sharing. We'd establish a community fund for local families in need. The media called it a feel-good story about redemption and family values. They had no idea about the war that had been fought to get here. 6 months later, I was named Businessman of the Year by the State Commerce Association. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of suits and ties, I thought about my family sitting in their jail cells. Gideon got 5 years for fraud and conspiracy. Maricel got 3 years and had to pay back everything she'd stolen from the fake insurance claims. Ridge and Mac were still fighting their cases, but it wasn't going well for them. Thatcher got the harshest sentence, 7 years. Because his side deal with Cashin's people involved some shady offshore accounts that got federal attention. They'd all lost everything. Their reputations, their freedom, their future. And I'd won everything. The factory, the respect, the power they'd tried to keep from me. But winning felt different than I'd expected. After the ceremony, I drove back to Beacon Harbor and walked through the factory floor. Workers nodded and smiled. The machines hummed with productivity. Everything was perfect. So why did I feel empty? That night, I called Detective Ortiz. I want to make a statement, I said. About what? About my family's sentences. I want to request reduced terms. She was quiet for a moment. Are you sure? They put you through hell. I'm sure. The next week, I testified at their sentencing hearings. Not to defend what they'd done, but to ask for mercy. I spoke about second chances, about family, about the importance of forgiveness. Gideon's sentence was reduced to 3 years. Maricel got probation and community service. Ridge and Mac got plea deals that kept them out of prison. Thatcher's sentence stayed the same. Some things couldn't be forgiven. Afterward, Gideon approached me outside the courthouse. He looked older, smaller. Broken. Why? He asked. I studied his face, looking for the man who'd raised me. He was still there, somewhere under the shame and regret. Because that's what Grandpa would have done, I said. 2 years later, I was standing in the same spot where this all began. The Beacon Harbor Airport. But this time, I was the one waiting. Gideon walked through the terminal doors, carrying a single suitcase. Prison had aged him, but his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in years. We stood looking at each other for a long moment. Hello, son, he said finally. Dad, we didn't hug. We weren't there yet. Maybe we never would be. But it was a start. I heard about the co-op, he said as we walked to my car. And the community programs. I nodded. Grandpa's vision. Just bigger. He'd be proud. I hope so. We drove in silence for a while. Finally, Gideon spoke again. I was wrong. About everything. About you. About the factory. About what mattered. I kept my eyes on the road. I know. I was scared, he continued. Scared that you'd be better than me. Scared that you'd show everyone what I really was. And what's that? He was quiet for a long time. A weak man who made weak choices. I pulled over and turned to look at him. You made terrible choices. But that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Gideon's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not. But I'm giving it anyway. We sat there for a few minutes. Two broken men trying to figure out how to be a family again. What happens now? He asked. Now you find a place to live. Get a job. Start over. And us. I started the car again. We'll see. 6 months later, Gideon was working as a floor supervisor at the factory. Not management, not ownership, just honest work for honest pay. He was good at it, and the workers respected him. Maricel had moved to Florida, claiming she needed a fresh start. We talked sometimes, awkward phone calls where we both pretended things were normal. Ridge had gotten his act together, finally. He'd moved back home with his parents and was slowly paying back his debts. Uncle Mac was running a legitimate business for the first time in his life. Thatcher was still in prison. He wrote me letters sometimes, angry at first, then pleading, then eventually just sad. I wrote back, short notes telling him about the weather or the factory's progress. Small connections across the void. And me? I was running a business that employed 300 people and supported dozens of local families. I had money, respect, and power. But the thing I valued most was something simpler. I was sitting in my office late one evening when Elliot knocked on the door. He was officially retired now, but he still came by most days. Working late again? He asked. I gestured to the papers spread across my desk. Always something to do. He sat down across from me. Your grandfather used to do the same thing. Work late, worry about everyone else. Someone has to. Elliot smiled. You know what he told me once? He said the factory wasn't his real legacy. The people were. I looked up from the contracts. What do you mean? He meant that buildings and machines don't matter. What matters is what you do for the people around you. How you treat them. How do you lift them up? I leaned back in my chair. Even when they don't deserve it. Especially then. The next morning, I made one final decision. I established a foundation in my grandfather's name, funded by the factory's profits. Its mission was simple. Help families in crisis, no questions asked. The first check went to a family whose father had lost his job and couldn't make rent. The second went to a single mother whose car had broken down and she couldn't get to work. Small things. Human things. 3 years after this all began, I stood at my grandfather's grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates. I think I finally understand, I said to the marble. It was never about the factory. It was about what we do with what we're given. As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a notification. A local news story about the Foundation's latest project, building a community center in the poorest part of town. The headline read, "Local business owner continues family legacy of service." I smiled and kept walking. The empire I'd built on their betrayal had become something better, something worthy of the name it carried, something my grandfather would be proud of. And for the first time in years, I was proud of it too.